All right, so I'm Leslie Singer of Brown Harris Stevens, and I'm really, really pleased to be able to present and moderate tonight, ahead of the curve, preparing for middle school and beyond. And we have three esteemed panelists. So let me just start by a brief bio on each, starting with Sasha DeWind, the CEO of Tutor Associates. As CEO at Tutor Associates, Sasha has spent over a decade working in the field of education. Sasha began her career at Tutor Associates as a program director before taking on the role of vice president in 2013 and CEO in 2018. Over the last 14 years, she has counseled thousands of families about their children's educational plans. Sasha is passionate about giving students concrete tools to manage anxiety, fatigue, and self-doubt so that they can reach their goals. She also believes parents deserve the same compassion as their kids as they navigate their children's educational needs. I can vouch for that. Sarah Evans. Sarah is a psychotherapist and a psychoanalyst, and Sarah maintains a full-time private practice in Manhattan and in Westchester. She works with adults, adolescents, and couples, specializing in anxiety, depression, and relationship difficulties. She's an alumna of Harvard as a BA, NYU as an MSW, and National Institute for Psychotherapy. Sarah has previously worked in outpatient mental health settings, providing treatment to adults, adolescents, and families. For the past 8 years, she's also developed and led professional development workshops at Tutor Associates around working with test anxiety, motivational difficulties, and other social and emotional challenges impacting their learning. And Elise Cohn, certified learning specialist in child-centered math, language, and test prep tutor. After a 20-year career nurturing the development of corporate brands and advertising industry, Elise shifted her focus to the venture that has always spoken to her most deeply, nurturing the intellectual and emotional development of young children. She entered the literacy and mathematics training program at Lindemood, and she can correct me in my enunciation, Lindemood Bell Learning Processes, where she worked for 3 years, helping thousands, hundreds of students rise above their learning challenges to become confident readers, writers, and numbers people. She went on to train at Orton Gillingham Institute and the Windward Teaching Training Institute, and continues to further her schooling in the field of educational psychology to this day. Elise's sensitive, holistic, and child-centered approach to teaching has made her a highly sought-after learning specialist, essay writing coach, elementary level math specialist, and IC and SSA test prep tutor. Now, Elise, and thank you. I'm really excited to be doing this with you three. We had talked about a poll, but I don't know if we want to kind of just jump into questions. Okay, so jump into questions. What's ahead? Looking forward towards middle school. Let's start with Sasha. Can you tell us what's different about school? What changes from elementary?
Yeah, there's so many changes from elementary to middle school, and some of them are specific to your child's middle school and others aren't. I think overwhelmingly the expectation becomes, children, do more independent work. They often do more independent work at home. They're expected to manage, usually shifting between classrooms more and classes more. And for some, if not many students, they're shifting from a sort of non-graded anecdotal sort of system of evaluation to graded systems, which can really add a lot of pressure to the work they've already been doing. And, for some middle school students, there's a real shift too in the sort of way they experience school, from a more play-based model to sort of a more traditional model, depending on where your child is. And you're going to keep hearing me say, depending on where your child is, because there are very different middle schools out there. And to be a middle school student at Calhoun is not the same as to be one at Trinity or St. Anne's or Grace Church. They all have their own curricula. They all have their own sort of values. And so I think the first thing is to figure out where your child should be. And then you can start to really understand what that middle school expects of your child, so that you can sort of get ahead in that and help them thrive when they get there.
Sarah, so what is going on developmentally as these children transition from that age of 9, 12, 14?
To 14 and beyond. Yeah. So such a good question. And I'll give just a kind of snapshot answer, because the big, a lot is happening developmentally. So there's a lot going on. Brain development is still so active. So I'll start with kind of cognitively, because I think it's easier if I break it into areas. So cognitively, a 9 to 12-year-old is developing more ability to use their prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is this part of your brain. And that's what you use for focus, concentration, planning, switching tasks, managing impulses, regulating emotions. So that part of the brain is developing much more. A 9 to 12-year-old, it's growing and developing increased capacity. And a 9 to 12-year-old is really working cognitively on executing basic operations, on applying skills in basic ways, in logical ways, taking in new information, learning strategies. So that's really the 9 to 12-year-old cognitive wheelhouse. The 9 to 12-year-olds are just beginning to start to think abstractly. They're just beginning, especially at 12, to start to think in more abstract ways, to start to hypothesize. So that's kind of like simmering. Cognitively compare that to a 14-year-old and beyond, right? The 14-year-old is doing all of that, but in addition, their prefrontal cortex is growing more. So again, increased capacity to focus, increased capacity to plan and to execute multi-step problems, to execute planning in a multi-step way. All of that is kind of further developed. And on top of that, they're really starting to have capacity for abstract thought, to hypothesize about the future. You can think of this in terms of literature, for example. They're starting to have a sense of themes in a book. They're starting to be able to think more abstractly about characters in a book. They're starting to think more hypothetically, even perhaps in science. So they're starting to develop, and they already have this beginning foundation for critical thinking and more complex problem solving. So that gives you kind of the trajectory cognitively from 9 to 12 to then 14 and beyond. So I know that was a lot, but let me give the very brief social emotional snapshot too, okay? Unless anyone wants to intervene, is that okay?
I just want to say was just on Sarah, what Sarah's saying is that's something I forgot to say, which is another big shift from elementary to middle, is this sort of shift from the concrete to the abstract, and an increasing expectation that we're working with abstractions from in math class and in English and across the board in terms of problem solving. So that cognitive part just fits into what I was saying earlier, and I just want to now go right to that social.
Right,
social
exactly. So it fits, which is good, because that means school is fitting where the development is, instead of going too quickly. And then socially, emotionally, to give just a snapshot, 9 to 12-year-olds, they're starting to have a more nuanced understanding of their feelings. They understand the idea that you can have mixed feelings. You can feel two ways about something. They just really starting to get that. They have more ability to describe themselves realistically. Like if you think about a kindergartner is going to say, I'm the fastest runner in the world. And they actually kind of believe it, right? A fourth grader or fifth grader is going to say, Dan is the fastest kid in our grade. And he is, right? And they know that, and they know they're not. So that's just the kind of different ways of perceiving their peers and themselves. There's a lot more comparing of themselves to their peers. There's more understanding of emotions over time. There's really ability to be empathetic. Like 9 to 12-year-olds, they're really more developed in this way. they can start to understand different perspectives in a situation, like, well, he was angry because he wanted me to play by his rules, but I didn't want that. And I felt like that wasn't fair. And, they're really able to operate in this way in situations. So that's really, it's so cool to see that starting in these 9 to 12-year-olds, and it gets more sophisticated again as they get to 12. So then you have 14, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you're kind of in a bit of this whole new territory socially, emotionally. Now you're in high school and puberty is really at play, right? So puberty and sexuality changes everything. And also there's just a heightened sense of their peers. And that becomes really the most important thing, how their peers feel about them, how they feel about themselves with their peers. There's just a whole level of complexity around peer interactions, the web of friendships and who is angry at who and who likes who and who's friends with who. It starts to get hard to follow. And there's also, in terms of parents' relationship to their teenagers, they're just starting to have this kind of push-pull, like, oh, my mom thinks this way. I don't think that way. What do I think actually? So you start to have this more dynamic identity development that's really happening beginning at 14. There's a greater awareness of the world, their place in the world, morality. 14-year-olds start to really look at injustice. They start to be very principled more and more. So there's just a whole bunch going on. I've said a lot, so I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
But I wanted to give a snapshot, like kind of an overview here.
Fantastic. Can you maybe give some helpful hints to parents of how to help support their children as they're going through these different phases?
Wow, it's like a big question. I mean, I think I will say this. I think it really depends on your child, which is kind of like the answer Sasha gave around depending on the school that your child is in. Being an attuned parent is really about knowing your child and what your child needs. So I think the reason why it's helpful to have a snapshot, bird's eye view of development is because as a parent, then you know what to expect. Around where your child is. If you know your child is 9 and cognitively you're not going to have them focus on math for an hour and a half, that doesn't make sense because cognitively they can't do that, right? So I think it's important as a parent to know what your child is able to do so that you don't ask them to do something they can't, right? Because then nobody feels good. If you ask your child to try to achieve or understand something that's like outside of reach, it's going to be frustrating for them. But otherwise, I think that just generally, I would say that I think that one piece of advice I would give parents is just to really enjoy their child in this developmental process, because I think when your child sees you enjoy their growth, when they discover something, even when it's something you, of course, know, it's really exciting when you share that joy with them. And I think that makes them feel good, like you're seeing them in a special way. So I don't know, those are some quick thoughts I have. I think so much of it would depend on a specific need of a child. So.
To talk a little bit about preparing elementary schoolers to thrive in middle school, we had in our conversations with each of you, I've heard you talk about how these years are formative time for a child's emerging identity as a student. And can you, Sarah or Sasha or Elise, kind of start to break this down for us?
Well, I could talk a little bit about what happens sort of at the beginning of and around 3rd grade, moving toward 4th and 5th from an academic perspective. generally, and there may be a little redundancy here with what Sarah said, because there's obvious overlap academically and emotionally, but so forgive me. So in third grade and throughout the elementary years into high school and middle school and high school, there's an increasing awareness of peers versus me. And kids start to develop this sort of these truths about themselves. I'm good or bad at math, or certain conversations that they hold as truths. That maybe starts to happen a little bit later, but it depends on the child. There's just academically in terms of reading and language, there's a shift from learning to read to reading to learn. And it can be a little bit, kind of challenging for some children to sort of shift into more of the sort of comprehension mode, getting starting to get a bigger picture. What do these words actually mean? Also, increasing emphasis on fluency and a little bit more formalized writing, expanding on thoughts and details, and starting to enter the realm of chapter books. And also depending on the school that the children are in or your child is in, there's this CTP test, for the first time. So this sort of test that kids are starting to get a sense that their performance is gaining in importance. A little bit in the early side, but a little bit of a sense of, oh, what's this all about, right? And then, yeah.
CPT, can you
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Sure. It's a test developed by the ERB. Some people call them ERBs, but it's just to basically to evaluate if the children are learning at the level they're supposed to be learning. So it's really a way for the schools to know if their teaching methods are working.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
No, that's okay. Anyone else have more?
No, I mean, and the CTPs are going to continue in private schools, through early high school. But
Right.
but Sarah and Elise are both talking about this cognitive, social, academic thing that's happening where identity around learning starts to form. And I think I have two little kids, and I think I'm going to give advice that I need to take, right? Because what we do, even in our most celebratory moments as parents, I do this with my children all the time. What we do is we fix their identity, right? So I say my daughter's like a little engineer, or my daughter's an old soul, or, whatever. And it's like, it's often well-meaning, or my daughter is a good tester or isn't a good tester, or my daughter's a reader or not a reader. And we all do this, right? But what it starts to do from a young age is it starts to give an either or, right? That we are an artist, but not this, that we are. And so instead, I try to do the right now is hard, or right now you don't love it, or well, you're also this, you're all these things, because the more our children's identities can be growing and unfixed from an early age, and their sense of self can be growing and can incorporate lots of things, the easier it is to learn when things are hard. And I know Sarah talks about this, and Elise and I, we all want our students to have that kind of tolerance, or that frustration tolerance, if you will, that when things are hard, not if, because they're hard, they're going to be hard, that if and when these kids meet these challenges, that's incorporated into their sense of learning, that it's not a failure, that it's actually part of learning, that part of learning is having a hard time and then puzzling through it with the right help. So I just sort of wanted to echo that piece of that identity, because by middle school, we meet so many 8th graders who are just like, well, I'm just bad at testing, or like, well, I just am horrible at math. And then the mom's like, oh, it's genetic. And I'm like, well, actually, your math education hasn't served you. Like, I can see how the concrete stuff that Elise was, teaches those 3rd graders, it's not there. The fundamentals that need to be there, they're not there. So then you can't build on them in these abstractions. And then you feel like you're bad at math, right? But actually, we just need to, there's actually things that you can learn, things, concrete things along the way. And then the identity, the more it ossifies, the harder it gets, the harder it is to break out of it when they go through, as Sarah said, those hard and big teenage years, right? We want them feeling confident even in their times of frustration and failure. So that was my little echo.
No, I think that's important, Sasha. And I think, it's really important for a student not to have so rigid a self-concept and to have flexibility about the way they see themselves. I know one of the favorite books in your company is Carol Dweck's book about growth mindset. And that's more in the popular culture these days. But I think the essence of that book is really about encouraging our children to be able to think about failure and making mistakes as part of the learning process, and that to have a growth mindset means, oh, I made a mistake. How come? What went wrong? What do I need to do differently? It's a real focus on process as opposed to an end result proving who you are. Like I didn't do well on the math test, so I must be bad at math. We really want to help students not go in that direction with their conclusion, but more go in the direction of, I didn't do well on the math test. How come? What didn't I understand? Oh, this is harder for me. Oh, if it's harder for me, I guess I need to understand it more. And then that alerts parents, oh, this is harder for my child. What can I do to support them so that it becomes easier, or so that they learn it in a better way? And cognitively, also developmentally, right? These 4th, 5th, 6th grade years are really important for these foundational skills to be learned, so that when you are in middle school and beyond, they're automatic, because you're actually building on that and trying to use abstract thought and hypothesize. You can't do abstract thought and hypothesize if you don't have automaticity with those kind of foundational skills. Your brain doesn't do it. It's still trying to use its energy and resources to do the automatic, to do the basic operations.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Elise. No, please jump in.
I was just going to piggyback on top of that. Also, that kids and adults' relationships with getting things wrong. If I'm very conscious of, kind of going back to my youth, trying to get everything right and wanting to get straight A's, and I didn't know how to incorporate wrong into my life. So I realized that, that puts the kibosh on any kind of growth mindset. So when I work with kids and myself also in trying to sort of grapple with this idea of like, we can't always get things right, I try to turn it into almost a celebration. Like, I'm thankful when I'm working with a student for that they answered incorrectly, because it gives us a chance to learn, and it really is about learning. So it's sort of frees them up when you change your relationship with mistakes to turn it into an opportunity to learn. And they're always shocked because I literally applaud. I celebrate errors, and it's kind of first like, what? But because kids and adults tend to shut down when they make a mistake and withdraw into themselves, they don't want to draw attention to it. They'd rather just sort of push it aside. But it isn't. If you can shift that experience, then it becomes more about learning and growing, whether it's because you did well or you didn't do well, or whatever that even means. So just giving the freedom to breathe through something that could ordinarily feel shameful is, I think a tremendous skill to be able to have in your life, because life is a series of problems, right? So we can't get away, we can't run away from it. So we might as well turn it into something more positive.
And I just want to add, sorry, Sasha, I'll let you go. I was just going to add that what's really interesting is I remember reading that in terms of brain research, we actually remember better when we make a mistake.
Totally.
So it's very true what you're saying. It actually is a great moment because we learn almost best when we make a mistake because it jars our brain and it's a surprise, and that helps us encode the learning actually more strongly. So it truly is cognitively a better opportunity to learn, you know.
So, but as parents, like, how do we really stay attuned to the fifth grader and the fourth and fifth grader who's still really learning how to articulate all of those big feelings? Like, what are some of the tactics or even specific phrases that parents can use to like help their child thrive and maintain a flexible growth mindset that you're talking about in the face of like frustration and discouragement? You're talking about celebrating their failures, et cetera, but phrases, terminology, and how do you stay present to kind of help them?
You know, I want to quickly concretely say that some of this is about frustration tolerance and that cognitive thing Sarah was talking about. So being attuned, for me, I have a second grader. I can sense when she's getting too hungry. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but her frustration tolerance goes to 0 when she's hungry. She gets that from her mom. But what I'm saying is that what I'm attuned to is that my kid has a really hard time in certain moment. I can see it building. I mean, with a second grader, it's a smaller amount of time. But I think what being an attuned parent means in a concrete way is knowing what it is that triggers that frustration. If it's hunger, fine, you address it. If it's that child was sitting for too long, you can address it, right? Take a break, go run around the house 10 times, whatever. But if the thing that's triggering the frustration is a sense of, you know, a sense of self that's being upset, right? I'm not good at something, and identifying, right? Well, then I actually think there's a lot you do over time, and not too much you always do right in that moment. Meaning you start to be attuned to the fact that your child is feeling discouraged, right? Or frustrated, or that they can't do something. That's when you start watching, and that's when you ask, can I reach out to the teachers? What are they saying? What are they noticing? Can I think through, you know, where these areas are coming up or when they're coming up? I think it's just about observing first, asking for help. I say, Elise, can you talk to them? You know, is that maybe there's a learning thing going on? Maybe there's a real barrier that gets identified right around second or third grade. Maybe, and this is what I sort of want to talk about later, but I want to go back to, is maybe there's a lot of anxiety around performance, and what Sarah just said about making a mistake. Yes, if your brain is that okay with making mistakes, then that mistake is an opportunity to learn, which is what it is for the three of us when we're talking about these things. But if you're anxious, if you are scared, your brain's not good at remembering much. So I see in middle school, and I know Sarah will speak more to this as we go on, but when we're dealing with our teenagers, that anxiety is, for my students, probably the number one obstacle in their learning, but also in their grades, in their scores. Like, not just like, we love mistakes. Yeah, we need to perform in certain moments. We need to get certain grades. Middle school starts being about how do you help your child thrive when the pressures of the world are there. That anxiety, I think it starts younger than, especially with COVID, younger than maybe we think. It builds, it changes, and it is, for me, the thing that maybe we need to address the most with our younger children.
Mm-hmm.
I think oh, sorry, Sarah,
No,
did you want
you
to
go, you go.
Okay, sorry. I think ideally you want to sort of anticipate that in the earlier years and give, you know, anticipate the possibility of, you know, as things ramp up, anxiety could also ramp up along with it, or this awareness of, oh, this really matters, like, so what I've found is helpful is to sort of to share a little bit about my personal. I'm going to reveal something that my brain has not been wired well to handle, and that's a sense of direction. So I need to, my brain, and I also think that's important to separate who you are from this brain that you're born with. So my brain does not allow me to know when I step outside the door, which way to go. I mean, it's not that bad, but and I've learned to compensate, because I come up with strategies to help me with the things that are more challenging for me. And so being, a little vulnerable myself, revealing my truth, my in particular struggle, and that when something is hard for you, it just, and it's not hard for, the other kid in the class or your best friend. It only means, we're good at some of us are really, some things come naturally to us, other things we have to just work a little harder at. And for me, it's sense of direction. For someone else, it's reading. But to sort of try and normalize it and empathize, and this idea of your brain versus you, you look at what with younger kids, and look at what your brain just made you do, not like, so that it's not as personal and it doesn't feel like as much of a failure.
And Elise also mentioned, built into her directions, I'm never lost. So Elise and I are good friends, because I can't get lost and she's always lost. It's good, right? My brain doesn't understand auditory things that come quickly. So we can all do different things. But what she mentioned is that, so she has strategies to help her still not get lost, right? And I think that's another crucial elementary school, middle school shift, right? Like, we start to add systems out at home, really, to help us manage things. And some of those are organizational systems, folders and planners and online things and calendars. And some of them are strategies like, every time I do this thing, I have to do this first, or when I'm reading, I always think about this, or right, things that are kind of procedures to help you. And that's what you sort of want your middle schooler to start to be building. You want them building these systems at home and for themselves that help them thrive, right? Not make them perfect or whatever, but help them thrive with their goals and your goals as parents. And so I think that counterweight is the systems. So like, you really do need, I mean, I have systems, and that's why I'm here tonight on time, right? And fifth graders aren't just born, you just don't get to middle school and then you just have systems that work. And my systems don't work for Sarah or Elise. We have our own systems we've developed over time. And children need the same attention. They need systems built over time in dialogue with what actually works for them. And again, that's about the attunement, but it's also about some concrete things like at home. Do you have a calendar on the fridge? Have you started to help your child plan ahead? Even with younger children, can they do these multi-step things? You can start to begin to look ahead, have calendars, start to plan. Younger children can start to be part of those familial plans.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, this, I have two things I wanted to say, but to build on what Sasha is saying first, this really makes sense, because again, I mentioned before, the prefrontal cortex is really developing more now, and you want to take advantage of that, right? You want to encourage that. Your 4th, 5th, and 6th grader is going to feel really good if you help them come up with a system. Well, what do you think is going to help you remember to put your homework in your folder? What do you need? Because again, we're not asking a 4th grader to do all their homework on their own without anyone checking on them. That's asking too much, probably, for most 4th graders. But you're trying to figure out what can they take responsibility for, and how can I help them come up with a system if it's a challenge. So, I think that is really helping them develop. You're trying to figure out how to help them use that part of their brain more in terms of planning and focus and concentration. And you're also going to help them feel like they're achieving something, they're taking ownership, and that will give them confidence. Like, oh, they know what to do with their homework, and then they give it to the teacher when they get to school, and so they got this down, and then they feel good. So I think that confidence building is one of the roles an attuned parent can play. And confidence building means kind of finding out what the right task is for your child to take more ownership of, depending on where they are in terms of their academics, because we're talking more about academics here. And I want to just piggyback on everything that was said before about making mistakes and frustration tolerance and how you manage those moments as an attuned parent. I think it's so crucial, right? When your child is in distress about anything, that's your moment as a parent. It's so good that they're there and they're with you. And I know as a parent, and I don't know any parent who hasn't felt overwhelmed by their child being in distress right in front of them. It's an overwhelming experience. Who wants to see their child cry or yell? No one. And at the same time, that is your opportunity. That's when your child needs you most. And it's a great moment for you, and it's a great moment for them. So you really can use that moment. As Sasha said, sometimes that's not the time to help problem solve how come math homework has put your child in tears, right? The first thing is you need to help them know that you care about them and you want to empathize. And both Sasha and Elise already emphasized empathy. So you really want to empathize with them and let them know you're so sorry, they're upset. This is so hard. I think empathizing with how hard something is, whatever that academic experience is, decreases shame, which is something both Elise and Sasha have talked about. And then I think, you can really then decide, like, are they calmer? Can they talk about what was upsetting them or what was hard? Can you help them break it down so it feels more manageable? What are you going to be able to do to help them with this moment? Are they really so lost? You need to call Sasha and get a tutor, or call Elise. These are all individual situations you'll need to assess, but sometimes it's helpful to have a little short soundbite. So Daniel Siegel, who is one of my favorite psychologists, he's written many books. He has this phrase, connect to redirect, meaning you have to connect with your kid first before you can redirect them into anything. So
great. These are all amazing, amazing tidbits. We've touched upon a lot. How do you actually know that your child's ready for middle school, academically and socially? And what might be some of the biggest issues you see middle school kids face in these areas?
I'll jump in with middle school, and then I can let Elise and Sarah talk about if they're ready. But, I think you really do want to find the right place for your child. I can't really emphasize this enough. When you're in the wrong environment, too much structure, too little structure, which actually can be really hard for younger children, or just an environment where they don't feel they can raise their voice, they can get the kind of attention they need or the kind of experience they need, then it's going to be a fight the whole way, right? And if you find a place where your child is happy, where they have educators that work for them and you feel supported as a parent, I just think everything's easier. And in terms of big things I see in middle school, no 8th grader actually wants to have the conversation about those folders with you, mom, but the 5th grader will. So do it earlier. The 4th grader loves getting all the folders in the system. They love having autonomy for the first time. So when you build those systems with your little kid, they're like, oh, look at me being a big kid. When they are big kids, folders are just, no, leave me alone. Only Sasha can then recommend folders, right? Then you're parenting. So a lot of this stuff is just easier. The anxiety, the organizational things, the identity. I guess to me, it's all easier when it starts younger. And I didn't mention this before, but Sarah did, the autonomy. If you notice that you're brushing your kids' teeth still for them, or you're answering questions for them when people ask them questions, which, we all do things for our kids, as Sarah said, both because it's hard to tolerate their discomfort and also because we're tired and we take the shortcut or whatever. But the more you can allow your child to take ownership of their own body, of their own tasks, of their own work, of their own learning, I'm telling you, in 8th grade, those conversations, you're not even having them. Your child is and I think that is wonderful for those parents of 8th graders who have really set the stage.
Amazing. Did anyone else want to elaborate on, or?
Elise, I was going to let you talk first and jump in after.
It's okay. You can. It's all right.
This is what
I could talk about academically, what,
yeah.
foundational
Yeah.
sort of things that would be, are important to have that oftentimes aren't, they're not exactly solidified. I've seen more and more, particularly in this last year or two, for reasons that we all understand, math skills, and I don't even know that it just started recently, it's just become more evident. Foundational math skills, the ability to really understand the logic behind, like, what's happening when we're multiplying? Why does this fraction work? They'll also look like this, or whatever is going on in the earlier years leading up to middle school. A lot of kids are missing that deeper sort of understanding of the why. It extends also into, and it makes it increasingly harder as the math gets more advanced in middle school. You really can't get away with not knowing that stuff well enough to be able to apply it to the higher order thinking that's required in middle school and beyond. Also, from a reading comprehension perspective, a lot of times kids will have assignments, read for 30 minutes a night, and they're just, they set the timer, they get the words over with, and then the timer's off and they're out the door, and they haven't really looked, and this is not universal, I'm speaking in very sort of broad strokes, but for kids who don't love to read for whatever reason, maybe there's an underlying issue, a challenge that isn't really evident or hasn't been uncovered. Same thing with math, possibly. But it's just the understanding, the deeper comprehension, the ability to infer, to ask questions, to, all of that next level thinking. It really kind of needs to be intact by the time they enter 6th grade.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense, Elise, and I'll jump in with some added elements, but I agree that makes sense. It fits in with cognitively what we talked about earlier, that if they don't have the concrete operations down in a certain automatic way, and if they don't have the logical reasoning down in a certain automatic way, you can't move to the higher order thinking, like you're saying. And that then makes middle school feel overwhelming. And if academically a student is feeling overwhelmed in middle school, that then becomes psychologically overwhelming, right? I mean, it is psychological. It's just that it becomes more difficult. If you're in middle school and you're feeling so overwhelmed by the academics, that takes away your energy and attention from the other areas, like interacting with your peers, and it affects how you feel about yourself. So I think trying to be prepared academically for middle school also sets someone up to be able to be more at ease socially, emotionally, when they're going through a lot of changes and there's increased awareness of their peers. From a social emotional standpoint, to kind of think about how your child's ready for middle school, I would say that you are thinking about some of the things we talked about, like what are they able to do on their own? What are they able to take responsibility for and do on their own and report back to you about? And do they have some systems that are by now pretty automatic, that they know what they need to do? I think also, how well are they able to manage their emotions when they're discouraged or frustrated? Do they come to you for help? Do they know how to get help from a teacher? Are they able to speak up just a little bit, not a huge amount, but we're just asking for a little bit at this point in a class, and ask for help if they need it? Are they able to participate a little in class? They may not be the most extroverted student, but are they able to speak up some and answer questions? Are they able to have friendships, right? Friendships are really important. And, are they able to have these friendships and these back and forth conversations? And, are they able to interact independently with their friends without you around so much to supervise or problem solve conflicts, right? Fourth, fifth, sixth graders, they should be able to solve some disputes that come up between peers. They should be able to work on that. If it gets really bad, they need an adult to help, but little things they should be able to work out. So that's kind of what I would be looking for.
And I think it depends on the child. I know some children tell their parents everything from young age. I have a child who gives me every detail of the day. And then there are children who are just like, it was good. It was fine. School is fine. Right. And they kind of don't give you a lot. And I know that parents who don't get a lot are always like, how do I know? And, one of the things I think, and I notice the younger you get, the more concrete the question and the more directed the question. So yes, you can just say, how was your day? And maybe your kid will tell you, but I say, what happened at recess? I can't wait to hear what happened at recess, because that's where all the good stuff happens. And it's where all the friendship stuff happens, and where I can see how my daughter's processing things. But if you just say, how was your day? She'll say, it was good. It was good. And it's the same thing that goes when my program directors speak with the middle schoolers, they try to avoid open-ended questions, and you get older and older, more open-ended and kind of abstract you can get. But our schools and our children's cognitive abilities, both of those things, encourage this sort of more fixed sort of reasoning. And I think children are more comfortable. So if you have comfortable giving sort of fixed answers. So if you have a child like that, you could say, tell me, the funniest thing that happened at school, or, tell me the funniest story you heard from another kid at school, or, whatever it is. But I do think that it's still playing to that same thing, that concrete cognitive level that the children need. And I wanted to also say to Sarah, that kind of advice about that moment of opportunity in crisis, which, gosh, we all struggle with so much. I have a toddler. I struggle so much, both in asking him to do more than he developmentally can, because I have a 7-year-old at home, but also I repeat to myself, be the calm to the storm, right? Like the storm has to come. We're not trying to get our middle schoolers, our elementary schoolers, or even our 3-year-olds, we're not getting them to avoid the storms. Their storms will come. They are going to break down crying. They are going to fail a math test or get frustrated because they're not the fastest runner or whatever, or get hurt feelings. The storms are, they're hard to witness. They really are, but they're inevitable. And the more we can just meet that with, as Sarah said, connection, which is such a beautiful way to put it. I hadn't heard it that way. But for me, to meet it with not problem solving yet, but to meet it with love and calm, that helps the storm pass. And then you can get to how do you solve those problems. So I wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I want to add to you, Sasha, too. I think what you said is so helpful for parents, because I think sometimes parents can, in a moment when their child is experiencing difficulty, like failed a math test, they can feel badly themselves and think that they did something wrong. And I think parents, that's one of the things that makes a parent feel upset. Like, what did I do? How did I let this happen? And I think it's important in that moment to say what you just said, which is like the parent needs to say to themselves, like, this happens and we're going to get through this and it'll be okay. Because then that allows them to be calm enough to support their child through this. And yeah, kids fail math tests. Kids have problems in school. Kids have a hard day. Kids have a day where a friend hurts their feelings. Kids have a day where someone leaves them out and they're really upset, where they don't understand what's being taught. All these things happen, and it's really important as a parent to be there with them through it.
And to leave the room when you can't. Sometimes I feel like I actually want to do more than I should with my child's work, or my child, I want to make sure the project goes well, or she feels like, And so I leave the room just if I can't, and I think that that's what I mean by that is that all of us parents need to call Sarah sometimes or Elise. We all need to, and then leave the room, right? And then so that we can be those parents to especially our younger children as they grow. And I think that decreases future conflict. I really do. If you set that tone earlier, you see those moms who are like, I don't know, they just manage their own work. And then you think, well, that's great. They just manage their own work. And I think you can really help a child do that if they're given the right environment and the right support early on when they should not be managing their own work. They really are not meant to be at this age.
You mentioned the math test, but let's talk about testing in general. Like, what kinds of testing are there, and how do you know if your child needs testing? And
So I think there's two kinds of testing. Do you mean testing for learning issues, or do you mean standardized testing?
Let's talk about the whole field of testing. So okay. We want to standardize.
Yeah, I'll start with standardized testing, and then Elise, do you want to do the rest, sort of the earlier ages, and also
assessments and seeing if you sense there's some possibly underlying issue that needs a little bit more, to be addressed in a little different way. Take it away.
All right. Well, I mean, basically, this is the beginning of this world of standardized testing, and I'm of sort of many minds about this. On the one hand, I think these tests are difficult and frustrating, and certainly test very specific things. And this is, as Elise said, this is the first moment of exposure for most of our children to any sort of standardized testing. For some kids, it's a low pressure. It's CTPs at school, or what you might call the ERBs. We can talk about that. But for most kids, they don't even look at those scores or see them. Their parents see them, the school sees them, and we can talk about them. But for some children, this is a moment of admissions where they're applying to 5th grade or applying to 6th grade or even to 7th, where they're actually using an admissions test. And those tests are higher stakes, right? Because they're actually used for something. And I guess what I would encourage parents thinking about these standardized tests that their children will begin to experience earlier, and then they will increase and continue. And you all know they go on to college and graduate school, is to think of these tests as sort of languages, like a foreign language that they'll be exposed to. And these languages are learnable. They're sort of sets of patterns. Most kids don't know how to speak them. They're sort of their own weird language. And so to set the idea, and that's that growth mindset Sarah mentioned, right? To set the idea that a language is learnable, even if you have no idea how to speak it and it seems like gibberish, right? It's not, it's decipherable, and it's workable. It's a good way for you as parents to understand. It's how I, as sort of an expert in the field, truly understand them. And as your child is exposed to them early on, you want to make sure that they are, that all the work they do on these tests is, again, concrete, procedural, and normalizes all the experiences that come with higher stakes things. And as the stakes go up, things come with that experience, and you have to start to work with proceduralizing those. So I'll pause there, because testing can go on and on and on, but it's just the very beginnings of learning and exposing these high pressure, in some situations, new languages that they really feel overwhelmed by because they've never learned them. And so that's well, I'll let Elise jump in on how you might do an assessment for some sort of learning issue.
Okay. All right. So I mean, it goes without saying that we all want to give our kids the best foundation possible for them to lead happy and healthy and successful lives. Sometimes we see our kids struggling, and I mean, we always, they're not always struggling, but we're going to witness struggles along the way. And it can be kind of challenging to know when it's something that maybe there's something underlying, it's some underlying thing that maybe you should look into a little bit more. And so the basic thing I would say to do, to think about is, and we glossed over this a little bit before, but consider what teachers have shared, what you've noticed at home. Do your kids, is there a family history of learning challenges? Let's say that's a big factor. Are you seeing increasing pushback, or is there, is your child suffering academically or emotionally, or having trouble expressing themselves verbally, or saying everything is boring? Because that's kind of a sort of the go-to word to avoid, confronting something that's challenging. It's boring, so I'm not going to do it. So if you're noticing certain things and you're thinking, I wonder, if I should get a professional kind of assessment and evaluation, but you're not quite sure, you could always start with hiring a tutor for this, which is more content sort of focused, or a learning specialist who really understands learning styles and from a little bit of a deeper perspective, or an executive functioning coach if it's about organization. And maybe after 6 months, see if there's improvement and reassess. If it sort of seems like it's persisting, you might want to consider, bringing it up a notch and going to a neuropsychologist to do a little bit of a deeper evaluation. And basically there are, 3 main things that a neuropsychologist would look for. It's the language, motor development, or behavioral challenges. And then they'll do a series of very sort of science-based tests, and sometimes, depending on the age of a child or the, or what the specific concerns are, it could be just a 3-hour-long sort of, let's see what's going on from a language perspective, or it could extend to, 6 to 9 hours over the course of weeks to do a deeper evaluation, because sometimes, or oftentimes, you could think it's something, but there could be, one thing, but most of the time there are other underlying issues that are present. And then, if in an ideal world, it would be amazing for everyone to have an evaluation like this, to understand, how we process information, how we learn, and how our children learn. But, that's probably not realistic. And so, but if there is a deeper concern, and you see your child suffering or struggling or withdrawing, that it would definitely be a time to really consider reaching out to someone to see what's truly going on. And the earlier intervention is a better idea. It's better because the younger a child you address these issues, the more the brain can sort of actually change to be, the learning can open up and the brain can actually change.
This is amazing. You guys have been absolutely incredible. Long list of many more questions, but the beauty is, I know you're all going to be available, Sasha, Sarah, and Elise. This is amazing. So I would love to continue asking questions, but I think I have to wrap it up.
I'll send along contact information and everything. So if there are further questions, people can reach out to Sarah or Elise or me privately and we can talk. But thank you so much, Leslie. It's so great.
You guys.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Good night.
All right.